Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Stephen Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd absolutely love it if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed us, 5 stars, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love it too if you shared the show within your universe. And do get something handy to write with, because in just a moment, I'll be telling you why you need to be in Dallas, Texas from November 14th to the 17th, 2024. So do listen out for that. But first, our featured guest on this episode of the show is Rachael Stern, Director of Operations at TPSIL, the press service of Israel. In her role, she's dedicated to reshaping the media narrative to combat anti-Semitism. A former lone soldier in the IDF's International Relations Unit, Rachael's journey led her to study counterterrorism and government at Reichman University. In her role at TPSIL, she serves as a link between Israel and international news agencies, overseeing the certification of crucial videos and imagery and facilitating partnerships as well. Her efforts were notably instrumental on significant occasions, such as the events surrounding the massacre of October 7th. Well, we'll be talking about TPSIL and what it's like covering the war in our conversation with Rachael, which begins right now as Rachael Stern joins us on the line via Zoom from her Tel Aviv home. We welcome you to IsraelCast, Rachael. And we had TPSIL's founder, Amos Eyal, one of my all-time favorite people. We had him here on the program twice. I had the good fortune of interviewing him, in fact, in your Jerusalem offices. But I do think it's worth highlighting again what TPSIL is all about. So do share a brief backgrounder for our dear listeners around the world.
Hi, Stephen. First of all, thank you so much for having me, of course, and also shout out to Vivian.
Of
I
course.
just wanted to say, yeah, this is my first time podcasting, so super excited to be here.
Your first time, Rachael,
My
you are
first
so
time.
front-facing with so many people. I can't believe that.
I'm deceiving, I think. Well, thank you for having me again. And okay, essentially, TPSIL is a wire service. I mean, we are a news agency, but we're also Israel's only wire agency. What that means is that whenever there's some kind of event, news event, let's say a stabbing, which happens often, unfortunately, in Jerusalem, we have a network of over 450 plus or minus volunteers throughout the country that will go photograph the event, document it essentially, provide us and our professional news desk with the coverage, and then we disseminate that to the international world. So we have news partners from all over the place. We have about 20 of them, and then plus we have a lot of news customers that purchase our material, and they use that for their news outlets.
And so what kind of reach do you have then globally?
I think a lot of people don't really understand what is a news agency and how much we're working efficiently. Because essentially, the major news agencies internationally usually are made up of, they're conglomerate news, right? So they made up of hundreds of outlets. So if we're from news agency can access one Indian news agency that's made up of 300 different news outlets, we're reaching all of the country essentially. So our reach is about 4 billion last year and counting.
Isn't that extraordinary? And it's global.
Yes, absolutely. So we mostly focus, I think this is something that also confuses a lot of Americans. We focus really on the places as of late, where the news of Israel doesn't really get. The places that are kind of not previously did not have access to Israeli information. Those we find really critical. And we understand this not just geopolitically, but for a lot of different security benefits and advantages. For instance, we partnered with Azerbaijan's news agency in 2019. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, they opened up an embassy in Israel. So we see how these relationships actually convey and materialize across, diplomatic, political, economic, every kind of sphere.
And I think the work that you're doing is so important. I'd like you to address this because there are countries that don't really get the full picture of Israel. I mean, dare I say, the United States doesn't get the full picture of Israel
Right.
itself, but at least we have more access than other countries which might have a more hostile approach to Israel. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, Rachael.
Sure. I think that the blossom of these seeds is more when we focus on establishing relationships, right? I mean, I always say to people, as somebody, well, actually, when I was in college, I created co-founded a club where we were working for the first time ever with Bahraini students and students from the Emirates. And I think that we understood, and I understood from that. And this is what also, and I'll explain to you actually, it's kind of funny how I got involved with TPSIL and Amot specifically. He was my professor at school, and I recognized, hey, this is a viable solution. And I say that because with all due respect, to the top-down shaking, handshaking diplomatic, Abraham Accord economic, um, all of these different reassurances of peace and prosperity, is it actually effective when it comes to implementing peace on a civilian person-to-person basis? No. And we see that. I mean, the average, I don't want to call them out, but the average Jordanian, Egyptian doesn't really have a high regard of Israelis. And we see this through social media, right? And we see this honestly on a day-to-day basis through their news. What changes that is when people have repeated exposure to authentic news when it's accurate. And because we have access to that, and because we're able to disseminate that, it changes and it plants a seed of critical thought. Now, we don't say this is going to change anybody's mind, especially let's say in Pakistan when they've had repeated exposure that's very negative of Israel.
Mhm.
But on October 7th, for the first time ever, through a relationship that Amos had with a Pakistani news agency, of course, it's kind of under the cover kind of thing, but he was able, I mean, I sent him the information of what's happening. And I said, you got to post this, and he did. So that means that people who previously had no exposure, we were talking about 2000 and what, two Daniel Pearl murdered for being an American Jew in Pakistan, now all of a sudden had exposure to a different perspective. And that's really the breaking component. Now, you have Kazakhstan, who also gets our news on a daily basis. We have all over South America, we have access. And it's just about allowing for people to see the truth of what's happening, sourced from the scene of a news event. There's plenty of outlets and news in Israel, but there's only one news agency that's Israeli that shows up on the scene of the event and provides the coverage to the international world.
Can you talk a little bit about your reporters and photographers and how does that whole process really work of news gathering? You hinted at it just a moment ago.
The beautiful thing I think about working for TPS is that I've really gotten an up close approach to civic journalism and understanding exactly how not just it's implemented, not just how it's like regulated, you want to say, but also just how it changes the entire world as we know it. We see that obviously everywhere with something happens, people pull up their, I don't use this and I sound so outdated when I say this, but TikTok, and they pull up their, and they record, I think has the capacity to reach millions of people just with a phone. Now, if you take a step back and you're recording that person who's recording a perspective, you then provide the world with such a broader angle. And that's what we do. So we have about 450 different, and they're volunteer photojournalists that, of course, we put through ethics and standards and everything like that. But whenever there's something that happens, we send whoever's is closest in the vicinity of the news event to race to the scene. And that's why not only do we have an average time of about 9-10 minutes from the moment something happens until when we actually access the coverage and are able to send it internationally, but also this is coming from Israelis that are, protecting their domain. I mean, people from the north, people from Judea, Samaria, we have so many different instances where this is their home. So they're very close and they want to control the narrative, essentially. I'm not saying, you know, control the narrative in the way that there's bias. I'm saying control the narrative in the perspective of they want to be able to provide the world with what they're seeing and what they're experiencing on a daily basis. And I think that that's really, really critical because I did a Zoom webinar a couple days ago.
Mhm.
A bunch of lovely, lovely like Americans mostly. very few people understood the extent of what's going on in the north right now. The fact that there's over 60,000 evacuees in Israel, the fact that there's over 250 different thousand Israelis that are living in constant fear, that have about 15 seconds to get to bomb shelters. And this is, they're refugees in their own country. And if people don't understand this information and they don't understand how it relates to the core, the soul of Israel, how it relates to the longevity, the sustainability, the survival of this country, I mean, we have a problem. The news is not being disseminated. There's a bottleneck going on, and a lot of it's negative. So we really need to be able to provide the world with these perspectives. And they're coming from people on the ground, on the scene. And these are wonderful volunteers that are so brave. I mean, I could tell you story after story from October 7th, from before October 7th. We had actually multiple volunteers that passed
Mm.
um, within the Army, out of the Army. We even had a volunteer in his early 20s. He was working security at the Nova Festival,
Oh,
and just a couple months ago they found his body. Yeah, and he
I'm
was
so sorry.
protecting two girls that were shot. One of them he sent on an ATV to go get help. She survived, as far as I'm aware. The other one he stayed behind with her body to make sure nothing happened to her, and he was killed. And I think we just see these stories over and over again of just uh, Israelis, man.
Yeah,
They will do anything for their country.
indeed. I'm really curious then, Rachel, what's the response towards TPSIL from the other news services that are out there
You
and the
mean
news
Israeli
agencies,
news agencies? Oh, international news agencies.
international ones?
hmm That's a great question because, and I'll take this from Amotz, the other week, a couple weeks ago, first of all, I want to say this. He's been on reserve duty now for over 300, and I think it's been 13 days, except for a couple that he took off, that the country allowed him to go to a news agency conference, which we are invited to by Azertech, our Azerbaijani partner. And actually, there they were hosting Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera put on a whole press event about the disinformation campaign by Israelis. And fascinatingly enough, they were talking about the burnt baby situation, which we all know to be true, right? We had access to it. I had access to it. I understand the things that happened. I had access to everything.
Yeah.
Um, and well, he was there. He stood up in the audience and said, I saw this with my own eyes. You can't go and perpetuate this falsity. It's not okay. He's showing people around him from different news agencies, international ones, the pictures that he himself has access to. I mean, so we have news agencies. I mean, we all understand Al Jazeera is a Qatari, the long arm of Qatar. But when it comes down to it, I think a lot of international news agencies are not that they're not anti-Semitic. They just don't have access to information. That's why we need to be there. We need to have these partnerships. And actually, within the last year, we've grown significantly. I think we signed on four different international agencies. With Kosovo, where we signed with Czech Republic. Hopefully, in the next couple months, we'll sign also with three more international news agencies. And as we have access to more and more, we understand everybody's desperate for Israeli news. This is the most high demand, country that exists when it comes to news coverage. I mean, everywhere. We all know. Any Jew knows everyone's obsessed with Israel. Um, so I would say largely people are really receptive. Then we have nuances based on what's going on in the world, what's going on. I mean, there's certain ones that we don't really communicate as much with, but hopefully that will change. And ones that are kind of, between the diplomatic gray lines that depending on the war, depending on the situation, they're more in favor. So,
I want to go back to something you said that you don't think that they're anti-Semitic, these news agencies. But what about AP, for example, which has a long history of really being very anti-Israel and let's call a spade a spade. I mean, anti-Semitic.
oh, absolutely. Well, okay. So I'm going to differentiate something here. I
Please.
was talking more about public news agencies that are governmental. I'm talking now if we're talking about private, because AP is actually a nonprofit. Um, that's a whole different story. So what we've understood is that AP, Reuters, AFP, and I've counted 14. It's debatable exactly how many there are, but because it changes on the day. There's no such thing as free press in Gaza, but there's about, let's say, roughly 9 to 14 different Palestinian news agencies, and they all filter into AP, AFP, and Reuters. And those are the three main news agencies internationally. So whenever you see, like, you'll open up whether you listen to MSNBC, CNN, Fox, whatever it is, it's copy paste 99% of the time from a news agency that's local to the area. So AP, as we saw on October 7th, had so many different freelancers that were hired out that were connected to Hamas. Now, the gray line that we understand is that, okay, it's all good and fine if they want to utilize the pictures. What's not good and fine is if they actually had prior understanding of what was happening. That is, I mean, the legal ramifications of that are significant, but also the moral ones. So, AP, look, I'm not here to say anything like, disturbing. I don't want to talk down any other news agency. However, I will say this, it's really critical that people are very, very, very aware of where they're getting the news, not just reading the names of the articles, understanding who finances AP, Reuters, and AFP, which is French, by the way. Understanding not just who their connections are, who their freelancers are. I mean, there's so much into that. And if you're interested in getting the full picture of Israel, you're not going to get it from AP.
I want to go do a little bit of a deep dive there because we're really talking about the importance of looking at the sources. Can you go back and just clarify something when you said about the copy pasting of information? Can you talk about that and then really the importance of the source of
Sure.
news?
Something that's really critical for people to understand is that there is not representatives all throughout the world every time that there's a news event. Let's say there's a traffic event in Ghana, the New York Times doesn't have a physical representative there that's able to relay all of the information back to the news desk. It just doesn't happen. So sourcing is international news outlets, like I said, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, they derive their news. They're dependent really on the local news agencies that exist. They copy paste the stories that they get. They utilize the pictures. Most people don't really see that. I would say a large majority of the news that they're reading on a day-to-day basis is op-ed pieces, opinion analysis pieces. People don't understand that hard news is a dying art. And honestly, it's the one thing that everybody's craving. It's the only thing that's important. There's so much bias, there's so much vulnerability to bias and misrepresentation when we just rely on what XYZ believes is happening in Israel. Because then you have to factor in their own personal bias. Everybody has them. So sourcing is so important. And wow, I could talk for 3 hours about it, honestly.
Well, we don't have 3 hours, so let me do a few pinpoints here.
Sure.
How do we know where the story is coming from, the origin of the story, and how do we assess the accuracy then of whatever we're reading or whatever we're listening to?
That's the problem. You don't have really the privilege of knowing 100% ever. You have to be, just as these news outlets are, dependent on the news agencies to provide it for you. So whenever an individual, a consumer of news, is reading a news piece, preferably not on social media, but you know how the world works now, um, if you're reading something, look throughout the article because one, the author will factor in either the sources that they're utilizing. First of all, if they're utilizing sources like Doctors Without Borders or the Red Cross, I mean, we can understand as people who have witnessed now the last 10, 11 months of what's been happening, these are not reliable sources. UNRWA. Yeah, we're definitely going to refer, to the numbers and the statistics of the Ministry of Health in Gaza, which is Hamas. So these are things to know. These are things to educate oneself on. Beyond that, looking at the names, researching, recognizing the news publication, and also realizing their connections, their freelancers, the photographers, asking questions. And unfortunately, it's not cut and dry. We don't have the average consumer, and this is why people are so confused. This is why they have managed this Palestinian news outlets, international news outlets have played into this game because one, clickbait, everybody's obsessed with Israel, right? Tons of money goes into this. And also because it's so easy to confuse a population when they are not properly educated and educating themselves on the situation. And we see that happening. And some of it, I will say, as somebody who's lived in Israel for the last 9 years, is perpetuated by Israel. And it's a far deeper root. I mean, ultimately, I say this. There has been such a large campaign to delegitimize Israeli institutions, but also they need to take hours to be able to certify something, to be able to fact check something. Their legitimacy, their credibility lies on that. However, this international push to delegitimize, let's say, the Israeli spokesperson or the Israeli different factions, I mean, it's classic Elders of Zion anti-Semitism, in my opinion, just because they're Israeli.
So what about AP, for example?
Oh, we're
Because
really
you know,
cherry picking AP. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I mean,
Don't
because
come after me.
yeah, back to AP, because I mean we open
Yeah,
up the New York Times, we open up the Wall Street
right.
Journal, and we see
Oh,
it's
the New York
AP.
Times is a
So,
dangerous one.
well, that's a
Yeah.
whole 3 hour
Yeah.
conversation if we want to talk about long conversations. Yet, when we look at AP, for example, are they then using Gazan reporters on the ground, and many of which have association then with Hamas? So then is AP then just copy pasting whatever they're getting from these Gazan reporters? Is that how it works? AFP as well.
Once again, there's no free press in Gaza.
Yeah,
So any information that they're getting is being relayed to them by freelancers that they're hiring within Gaza. Chances are, if they have affiliations and if they understood, let's just say what was happening, I'll just give this as an example because it's easy.
sure.
On what was happening on October 7th, we saw one of their freelancers who AP posted many, many pictures of kissing Sinwar on the cheek. That's a pretty close relationship when you're kissing the head of Hamas on the cheek, you know? So if that's their relationships and then AP then is utilizing their material, look, I mean, you can deduce for yourself. Like, yeah, it's a lot of gray lines, and it is. And I think that the world, because there's wonderful organizations that have put spotlights on this. I know Honest Reporting broke this story. Um, we broke a lot of stories when it comes to a lot of different. We had a lot of different TPSIL reporters, uh, photojournalists that were taking pictures of UNRWA sacks within these tunnels that we were so much evidence, okay, that it's impossible to close your eyes if you're actually looking for it.
And let's give a shout out where people can actually get TPSIL's information.
Unfortunately, to break it to you, we are not B2C. So we really work with international news agencies to
Mhm.
provide them with the news that they disseminate to their audience base. As of October 7th, we opened up a lot of articles just to be able to provide our contributors and our like friends and close supporters with information because everybody was just in turmoil and the information was not being disseminated. It just wasn't being distributed for many, many reasons, chaos, whatever. Um, so that's not something we really provide. I have had a running WhatsApp group for a while that I've provided to about 600 different people. We are opening up a app soon, so that will be in circulation. I don't know exactly when. I have to talk to Amot about it once he gets out of the army, hopefully. But who knows when that could be.
Right.
And
But
yeah,
that's a
but
coming attraction for people that want to access TPSIL
I
information
would say I
directly.
would say if you want to access and I would say if you want to access TPSIL information, you really have to talk to me and help me get into your local news because that is the way that you can ensure that the news that you're receiving is coming straight from the source, straight from the scene of an event in Israel, and it's being given to you, provided to you with the accurate headline, with the accurate information, with the accurate content and coverage media. So it's critical.
Right. And so our email address is israelcast@jnf.org, which I always give at the end of the show, israelcast@jnf.org. So if anybody wants to reach out to Rachael anywhere around the world, please write to israelcast@jnf.org, and then we'll pass along those requests to you, Rachael. How's that? You know, rather
Absolutely.
rather than having your email inbox, inundated with "We
Those are
love
the
you,
kind of
Rachael," and everything
yeah,
else,
those are the emails that I love.
I
I
mean,
think that
I don't know
people
if you're
who
willing
just
to share your email address or not. That's why I was offering the JNF one.
oh, it's okay. It doesn't, honestly, I think there's so many well-to-do people. There's so many people that really, really want to help. There's so many people
Yeah.
that recognize the problem because what I said and say and carry on about constantly.
Mhm.
I talked about this when had the lovely opportunity to speak with Shachar Azani, who I adore, back in November
We
at
do
the
too,
JNF
by the way.
conference. Yeah, wonderful human. But when we were talking about, at our talk in Denver, wow, I almost forgot. It feels like years ago. This year has
Yes.
been so heavy and so long. Um, I say this all the time, which is, and I've only seen the progression of this. I mean, look around, everyone has, is that when the news is misreported, it really, truly, it affects the state of Israel. It affects diaspora Jews significantly as well. I mean, there's constantly a collaboration between, a corroboration between the uptick of anti-Semitic violence and misreported news. We've seen that time and time again. I mean, with Al Hali hospital bombing, that was just one. I said this before, but President Biden wasn't able to meet with El Sisi from Egypt, Abdullah from Jordan, Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, out of solidarity for a attack that was a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket that hit a parking lot. I mean, and then it was misreported within hours, really, by most of the world about Israel has killed, the IDF has killed over 1,500 people without a single body bag being seen. I mean, it's just the fact is that people are out for blood, like mosquitoes to blood.
And what's so upsetting is that when there's a correction made, nobody looks or listens to the correction. So people already have that initial incorrect story in their mind moving forward. So talk to us then about your photographers and your reporters that have been in Gaza.
Mhm. Totally. Wait, I just want to comment on that. What you
Sure.
said is 100% true. The redactions are wonderful. They're great. Are they actually changing anything in people's minds? No. And that is why it's so critical why I really believe what the press service of Israel is doing is because we have to be the first headline. We have to be the one that originates the news. We can't be the one redacting. We can't be the one editing. And otherwise people just they don't care. The New York Times, BBC, you know how many redactions BBC has had? I mean, they just print. I'm pretty sure the person sitting there is Ahmadinejad himself, like sometimes. And then it's like 3 weeks later, they'll say, oh, oopsies. Who listens to that? Who reads? The mind has already been made. So we're doing a disservice to ourselves if we're not really capitalizing on having the first impact. But to answer what you were saying about the photographers, the photojournalists that we have within the army, I mean, the army is their first uh, occupation, their reserve duty, and they see that they also carry the weight of being an Israeli citizen, and so they'll
Mhm.
take pictures of whatever they can and send them to us. And it's a privilege that we get to work with such wonderful people that are fighting on every front, because really the media is Israel's most critical danger and front. And yeah, that is really what we have to say about it.
Are the people that work for TPSIL that are also serving as reservists, they're doing dual duty? Is that what you're saying?
Oftentimes they're taking pictures when they can, but they're reserve duty soldiers. And that is their most critical job. I can tell you from personal experience of like friends and also members within our own staff.
Hmm.
They're called out to do reserve duty. They were called out for months and months and months at a time. What's this going on 300 and whatever days.
Hmm.
But if they have the opportunity to be able to capture something that will enhance the world's perspective of what's going on the ground, they will. On top of that, we also have photographers in Gaza that do also relate to us what's happening. We had an amazing story, one of many, which was we were able to record the first ever anti-Hamas protest, and it was actually to my children. And that was relayed to us because again, no free press in Gaza. So also people at Gazans are looking for a way to express what's actually happening and their dissatisfaction with the situation. I mean, they're under tyrannical rule as well. So we actually have access to that, and we provide a voice to a lot of people and a lot of communities that do not have a voice.
Right. All right. Well, listen, I want to continue this conversation, Rachel, but you just referenced the Jewish National Fund conference, which took place
Yes.
last year in
Yeah.
Denver. And that's where we met. We had a lovely lunch together. And that's where, dear listeners, I first got to know Rachel and a little bit about her story. And we're going to hear some of her backstory in just a sec. But that global conference for Israel is going to be taking place once again, wouldn't you know it, this year in Dallas, Texas, November 14th to the 17th. Are you going, Rachel?
I hope so. I really do.
I know you're working 24/7. We're going to talk about your schedule also in a sec, but I want you, our dear listeners, once again, mark your calendars for November 14th to the 17th, 2024, this year in Dallas, Texas. You can go to jnf.org and you'll find a link there to register. This is the Global Conference for Israel. JNF does this every year. They are absolutely extraordinary. It's a conference filled with solidarity, inspiration, tactical and practical solutions to standing up against Jew hatred and really in solidarity with the land and the people of Israel. It's a really energizing experience. And some of the guests this year, Rachel, you may be interested to know some of the speakers include Colonel Richard Kemp,
Oh,
whom
he's lovely.
he's amazing. And we had him here on the show. And we're going to be getting him back on the show. I'll be interviewing him at the conference. He doesn't know that yet, but Colonel Kemp,
Who
we're
asked
gonna
him?
we're gonna get you. Someone's asking you, Colonel Kemp, and we will get you on the show. Actor and comedian Michael Rappaport is going to be there, and who doesn't
Oh,
love Michael Rappaport? And I am going to be front and center for that one. We also have broadcaster and activist Emily Austin, the founder of MACA, that's Mothers Against Campus Anti-Semitism. Elizabeth Rand is going to be there. Rabbi David Wolpe, who is also just a stellar individual and always brings down the house, and more are all going to be at that global conference for Israel, JNF's annual gathering, Dallas, Texas, November 14th to the 17th. I have not yet been to Dallas. And as I mentioned on a previous show, Rachel, I was actually a huge fan of the show Dallas, of course, before your time, growing up.
never heard of it.
You never heard of Dallas? You never heard of the whole
I
Who
do
Shot
know what I Dream of Jeannie is, but Dallas, no.
Well, you know that the key character, J.R. Ewing, Larry Hagman, was uh, the main character in I Dream of Jeannie. You know that?
No, really, did not know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Larry Hagman. He was uh, Major Healy. Was that his name? I can't remember right now. Someone's going to correct me on that. But the
Yes, they did.
master of Jeannie was Larry Hagman, and then he became J.R. Ewing, who was the seminal character, the villain in Dallas. And so I was a huge fan of the show. So I'm looking forward to Dallas. And just as an aside, I'm going to give my own podcast, The One Way Ticket Show, a shout out because I actually this last year interviewed Linda Gray, who's the actress that played Sue Ellen Ewing, who was JR's wife on Dallas. And she is the loveliest person. She's the kind of woman you can just speak to for hours and hours. Charming, funny, witty, and just, I loved her.
Go
Anyway,
listen.
what?
Go listen to that
Yeah, so
episode.
everyone's got to listen to that episode. But for the moment, we're going to go back to IsraelCast right now. And again, that global conference for Israel. Listen, I'm a bit of a stream of consciousness kind of guy, so I always have to rein myself in when I'm doing these conversations, Rachel. But I just had to say that about Dallas because if nothing else, going to the global conference, I'm actually very excited to go to Dallas. So I really do hope to see everybody there. And once again, jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org, and you can navigate there, and there's all the information to sign up for that conference. I'm really excited about that. So hope to see you there, Rachel. Indeed. I want to go back to our conversation, though, now about TPSIL, because you mentioned that Amos, the founder, has been on reservist for 10 million days already, in
It's
Gaza
like,
and fighting. And it's really, and can you talk then about the organization on October 7th and October 8th because so many were called up for reservists. And then there's Rachael left with, I believe, your colleague really just sort of holding the
wishes.
bucket.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, wow, it's crazy to me. I will say this, Steven. It's so insane to me to think about the fact that it's almost been a year. That day was dreadful, and I can't even wrap my head around it still. From the moment I woke up at around 6:30 when I first started hearing, or whenever the first alarms went off in Tel Aviv, um, I called a friend and I was like, "Do you hear?" I called another friend and I was like, get the hell up. And that kind of just has been life since then. Sitting with this understanding of the evil, and then having to run yourself into action because,
Mhm.
oh, hello, you work as director of operations for a news agency, for Israel's news agency. Okay, that means that we're on now. And it's go time. I mean, I will say this, that Amos was out. he understood, like he got reports coming in. He went to go check out things early morning Saturday. I don't know why he was out on his motorcycle. Like
Mhm.
I guess he had a feeling. And
He went straight. He went
he went
straight to the
straight when he saw the
border.
reports, he went straight to steroid. He tried to get as far as he could. And
Yeah,
security forces were like, you can't go any further. It's an apocalypse zone. And he
yeah.
saw an apocalypse zone. And since then, you know, he was actually still able to coordinate kind of with us back and forth, but I will never forget those text messages that I got from him that day. He was like, it is like he didn't have words, and neither of us did. So we just had to move. And basically, I was sending emails out from that morning. There's a situation, there's rising tensions. We're not 100% sure about what's going on, but whatever we know, whatever content we have, we'll get to you. We got the first ever video from a resident of Kibbutz Nirim, and she was sitting in her house as terrorists were trying to break in. She was recording it and sending it to us, so we were able to break that. I mean, we sent that to Fox News, who's a partner of ours. Like they released that, and it just went on from there. I mean, really, it did. I was in contact with pretty much, like, I would say about 30 different news outlets that day, just begging me to understand what's happening. And then it just continued since people had such a demand and we didn't have enough people because left and right people started getting called back. I think it was like our manpower of our professional staff went down by like, I think we were reduced to like a team of 30%. Our producer, wonderful, her name is Shelhevet, our writing team, our editors, Pesach, like it was just insane. And there's no words to really describe it. I think it was round the clock and then the nightmares come. So you don't even want to sleep. And it just didn't end because that whole first week, I mean, it took a couple weeks before even the army was able to get things under control. So, um, yeah, the delegation of work was really difficult, but I knew immediately within those first like couple hours that my main intention was just to be able to get whatever content we received as far as possible. So just coordinating with the different news agencies that we have partnerships with and letting them know we're here. We'll get you what we can in the early, you know, days and hours and stuff like that. But here's what we have and publish our articles.
So,
Do it, you know?
yeah, exactly. You have
Yeah.
450, is that right? Photojournalists as well as reporters out there
Around that. I'm not sure
around that.
exactly the
Right.
count, but yeah.
So I'm just wondering, but a lot of them were called up for reservists. So how did you then get news flushed out because you didn't have the
They,
manpower?
we had the content that was coming in that people were recording. And whenever there was, let's say, because they're spread throughout the country, right? So whenever I'll say this from my personal experience. I live in South Tel Aviv. There was a rocket that fell because, of course, the Iron Dome is not 100%. The rocket fell that was in the building behind mine. Bear in
Wow.
mind, that's all while I'm working, and under constant rocket attacks. And then, of course, I have a Jewish mother who's freaking out that I'm trying to keep in check. But what can I say? Mom, we're under attack. Shush, let me work. Okay, that's not really that nice, but I tried. Anyways, bless her heart. So yeah, there was, and I had friends that went out and I went out and we took pictures. And when there's that kind of a situation, you call in people from all around the country. There was rockets falling everywhere. When there's something damage done to a building and when there's damage done in general, or when there's something that's happening, we have our professional photographers, but also our network of these volunteer photojournalists would go out and record the coverage and send it to us.
So even though many of them went to reservists, you still had a retinue of people
Oh, absolutely.
that that
Yeah.
that was doing the reporting. Got it. I was going to ask you, and you just hinted at it. Really, how do you and your colleagues keep your emotions in check? And I also mentioned earlier on that you work sometimes 24/7, literally 24 hours a day. I mean, you're always on. So how do you manage all that, Rachel? Just
Well,
personally.
I would say the first 6 months of the war were really, really, really hard. I think personally, trying to digest, also trying to deal with, I mean, on a personal level, obviously, I also lost people. Besides the fact that you also you go through this existential crisis, especially with my position of being first exposure to so much evil. It's really hard to kind of also carry about your day when on top of that, people that I mean, the first couple of weeks I went to 4 or 5 different funerals of my own. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I would say I definitely don't work 24 hours a day anymore. I take my time because everybody was gearing for just burnout, and it never ends. The news never sleeps. And I know this from also my colleagues that work internationally. I see them constantly online, and I realize it's a surefire way to gray hairs or being bald. So there's some degree of self-preservation that has to enact. But that being said, I think all of us have really grappled with it, and I just would say that I hope one day we can get just such a wonderful amount of donations and this and that, and people that are supporting us, and we have so many different news customers that all of us can go on a beautiful, beautiful vacation. I'm just kidding. That's never gonna happen. It's the news. But I do think that one by one, like we're all kind of realizing, we need to figure out how to breathe because it's never gonna stop. And the war has been months and months and months, and it's not over. And we see tensions with Iran, and we see Hezbollah and Syria, and it just doesn't end and everything. And it's just like there is a certain point, like I said, where self-preservation needs to enact.
So it sounds like you're still figuring out that balance.
Absolutely. And it's not like a permanent success, but I was saying this to a friend the other day, and I do maintain this, which is I think after this last year, I think the thing that I have learned personally the most is that you need to find a baseline of gratitude. Otherwise, you lose yourself to everything. It's easy to get swallowed. So as long as I can wake up in the morning and appreciate the fact that I'm alive, that I'm healthy, that I have a job that I really am passionate about, that I get to expose the realities of what's happening in a country that I'm very passionate about to the world, and even the fights that I've had to go through in the last year, really having to reconcile my own need to exist in front of people and justify it for some reason really shook me to my core. But also realizing that there are wonderful people. And it's kind of always this like seesaw.
Right. Well, what you're doing is really makes an impact and it has meaning.
I think so too.
So that probably keeps you going, I'm guessing. Just one or two other bases, and then I know you got to go back to work, unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately for us, shall we say. Just to go back for a second to international media, it seems that terrorist organizations get a free pass from the West in the media, but Israel doesn't. So then, how do you suggest we, the royal we, the collective we, respond, especially when you see the news being distorted? How do we respond to that inaccurate news, that fabricated news? Like, what's your suggestion for folks just like me, average people?
Call me. I wish I was kidding. I think that the only way to really be able, and I'll say this till I am blue in the face, the only way to really certify the fact that you're getting the news, the accurate news out to the international world is when it's coming from the source, when it's coming from the scene of an event, and when it's coming from a source that you attest is reputable, credible, authentic. If you despite all of these different allegations and despite the many, 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 many issues and inaccuracies and this and that, I won't call out the names, the two letters of other news agencies, but if
And
you
and let's just say the first one is the first letter of the alphabet.
really, oopsies, you don't say.
I said it, not you, Rachel.
There you go. I think that people just need to be really, really have laser vision about what they're subscribing to, what they're reading, and really modify it. Talk to their friends about it. If you have a friend that's sending you, this is a personal experience. If you have a friend that's sending you Al Jazeera news and they're saying this is credible and this is legitimate, send them research. By all means, take an initiative to educate people that clearly are not in a position to educate themselves, or
Right,
at least have refused to. Now, again, we can call that anti-Semitism. We can call that ignorance, whatever we want to call that. I'm not sure. It depends on the spectrum, right? But ultimately, it's the responsibility of every individual really to, especially if they have some kind of connection to Israel, to recognize, hey, I know that these words that are being thrown out, apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of these absurd, absurd words that are totally taken out of context, totally not legitimate in any faction of the way, especially you would know that if you took 5 seconds to walk in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in any major Israeli, in any city in Israel, right? You would recognize that it's absurd. But so many people don't realize that. So I would say one, buy a ticket for every single LGBTQ plus for Gaza, buy them a plane ticket. Uh, and let's see the world change that way. But I also think, when people don't have the ability to be able to physically see what's going on, you have to rely on the news. It is, again, a weapon and a tool. And the only way that we can really certify that the news that we're getting into the international world is legitimate is by sourcing from the scene of an event by, again, a trusted source.
Yeah.
So,
Well, oftentimes people say something's fake news, and I hate to use that term right now because then if you do, people think you're a
yeah,
kook, right?
right.
So I think your approach is probably more of an academic and a correct approach of sharing counter information with them and giving them other
Checking the
sources.
sources.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Checking the
Ab-
sources, looking around, recognizing the background, recognizing the benefactors, recognizing the nation, um, and really being able, and if you do need to call in a friend, send me an email or something like that. I would say the thing that makes me the most upset is so many times I've had conversations with people and they've said, I've lost my daughter, I've lost my
Yeah,
sister, I've lost family members because they access to that, they only read the New York Times. And the New York Times, we all know, is on a rampage
yeah.
to be as misinformed as possible and misinform the public. And this is one of the largest publications in the world. And and I have so many examples of it. So if you need to do some background research, don't be afraid. Dig. This is the news you're reading after all. This is your perception of the world. It should mean that much.
Well, it's not only the New York Times here in the United States, NPR,
Ah,
aka National
National
Palestinian Radio.
Palestinian Radio.
Yeah,
Hello.
National Palestinian Radio. I mean, I really had a go at somebody. I was having, without going to the whole long story, but I was having um, lunch with friends that were visiting, and one of their guests was really criticizing Israel. And it's clear that this individual was only getting their information from the New York Times and from NPR and MSNBC. And then there we went. And I clarified her point of view or gave her a different point of view. So there you go. You just have to arm yourself with correct information. And I agree, people have to go to Israel and see things for themselves. Rachel, I want to ask you, just so our listeners can get to know you now a little bit better as we begin to wind down our conversation. I gave a little bit of your bio at the beginning, but I want you to share with everybody how you got from, a girl from West Virginia makes it up working for TPSIL in the middle of a war.
Oh, that makes me sound like some podunk. Okay,
No, it's not. I want to tell you, I've been all over the world, but I have not yet been to West Virginia, and I really want to go to
oh,
West Virginia because I've heard
oh,
it's a very, very beautiful state.
it is. It's absolutely beautiful. Just
Listen, people can ask how a boy from Illinois is now hosting IsraelCast. I mean, there you
like,
go. So,
yep.
yeah.
Okay, well,
And that would be me, by the way, Rachel.
I assume so much.
Yes.
Um, I was really never, I never really acclimated, I think, to the surroundings that I had. I switched schools a lot. I was in and out of a lot of different states and just never really found myself in the US. And I said to myself when I was in high school, I'm gonna go to Israel. Um, that's it. I really romanticized kibbutz life, and that was for me. And I wanted to work in agriculture. I came to Israel. I worked on farms. I worked on a goat farm. I worked with horses. I worked in the dairy with a bunch of cows, up to here in cow poop even. Like, yeah,
Rachel
it
is
was an
pointing to
experience.
her neck for our
Yeah, to my
podcast
neck,
listeners.
literally. Um, and that's when I really discovered my love of this country and how I discovered it. Then I went into the army and I was like, okay, I'm stuck now. And from there, I found a different path. Honestly, I just decided international relations. That's what I did in the army, and I just continued on from there. I went to school and really, really understood. I had the privilege of studying. Unfortunately, I studied during COVID. Putting that aside, I had the privilege of meeting professors that were really within their occupation. I mean, I had ex-NSA professors, ex-Mossad. It was just really wonderful. And there I met Emil Tayal, who was my lecturer, and he taught a class called the media in conflict zones, which is clearly what I'm doing to this day. And it was incredible because I said to myself, this is the power. The power is the media and the power is being first. So that was kind of my connection. I mean, look, if I had my druthers, some days I just zone out, take a couple minutes, and I pretend like I'm still in West Virginia in the middle of nowhere on a farm, just being quiet, not in the middle of potential Irani attack, potential this and that. But I'm so grateful for my life here, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I have to be here. And honestly, in my heart, I'm a Zionist through and through. And there's no other place I'd like to be. I sound like Dorothy. Oh God.
It's a beautiful story, though, actually. It really is because you found your calling, you found your true home. And I just think it's beautiful. So now really as we wrap, you referenced the course that Amos taught you. So what do you want people to really know how difficult it is to cover a war, Rachael?
First of all, I would say there's so many different components. There's logistics, there's security, there's access. Accessibility is a huge component. You have to be able to be interconnected to the entirety of the country. That
Mhm.
means in every angle. And there's always so much going on beneath the surface that's so far ahead of you before, of course, the average public gets access to it. And you have to be interconnected, and you have to have the relationships. And really, it just all comes down to personal relationships, especially in Israel. Whenever it's a very clap on the back kind of society, but more than anything else, I would say that it takes a lot of it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of passion, and it takes a lot of being able to be like constantly aware of the fact that you need to put out the narrative that is true. It doesn't always have to look great. It can't. It's a country that's doing its best, but it
Mhm.
always has to be accurate and it has to be timely. And those two components are the most important part of the news is being accurate and being timely. Unfortunately, so many different international outlets and networks and organizations fall through the cracks, and I see this. I mean, we all see this. But but the desire is there, and I would say that is what I've learned, and I'm learning so much on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I could do it. Teach my own course. I mean, if anybody wants to hire me to teach as well, I'm available.
Rachel's available.
The 3 hours that
Yeah,
I that I don't sleep.
I was to say you're working 24/7 already. So what's an extra couple of hours in the course of a day for Rachel Stern? Well, listen, Rachel, this has really been truly a pleasure. It's been inspirational, and we love the work that Amos, you, and the entire team are doing over at TPSIL. And really thank you for bringing the truth of what's
Thanks for
going on in
volunteering.
Israel really to the rest of the world. And we know that this is just the beginning for TPSIL. As I said, I was in your new offices even before there was a lot of furniture, et cetera. And I know that it's really just going to go from strength to strength. So we just wish you and the entire team, and of course, our dear friend Amos, all the best as he does his reservist duty. And we want to thank you so much for joining us here on IsraelCast. We look forward to seeing you again real soon, and maybe we'll even see you in Dallas.
Fingers crossed.
We
Bye.
hope
Thank
so.
you so much, Stephen.
We
Really.
hope so. All right. Well, we will have info about Rachael and TPSIL on the show notes page of our website. It's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Hope you got it after all these years. And of course, we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for IsraelCast. And once again, don't forget to rate and review us 5 stars, of course, because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more folks around the world to find us and to hear from extraordinary people like Rachael. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. And indeed, it takes a homo shop to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Stefan Oberman, JD Krebs, and Ellie Cadron. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. And for more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, I know Rachel would love to hear from you. Amos would too. And so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Once again, our email address, israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Stephen Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.